Hello, I'm Dean McKnight, and welcome to another program, Operation Our Town. It's a part of the Operation Our Town mission that we talk about recovery, prevention, and law enforcement. Today we've got some very special guests that are going to talk about recovery and about what it means to have a need in our community and how we reach that. We're going to start out with a very special guest and a very special friend of mine, Frank Rosenhoover. Frank, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Dean. It's a pleasure to be here and good to see you.
Frank and I go way, way back to our old basketball playing days. Before I was built like a basketball, we actually played.
Yeah.
And I'm so, first of all, Frank, let me say I'm impressed that you're here to tell your story.
Well, thank you.
And
thank you.
Tell us a little bit about yourself and your story.
Well, I came from a long history of alcohol users. In fact, my father was an alcoholic, and in my family there were 8 siblings, and all 3 brothers of mine are now dead, directly resulted to alcohol-related problems. So I grew up in a very small town up in northwestern Pennsylvania, and I was surrounded by those issues. We lived a rather poor, abject life because having an alcoholic bread earner means that there was more boozing than breading, and as a result, I faced some issues that perhaps I was not capable at that time of handling, and at a younger age of 16, I took my first drink, much against my better judgment, having grown up in a family that had an alcoholic person in it. But I didn't think much of it other than I just felt I was entitled to it. And as a lot of teenagers do, we used to have weekend parties and so on. And as I look back over my life now, I realize that I was an alcoholic from the first drink I took. And Judy will be talking a lot about the genetic and the societal changes and all that affect people, but I remember many times when I was drinking in my very young stage of life, I had blackouts and never much thought of them in those days. But over a period of many years, it became much more pronounced. I graduated high school, went to the Army. I spent 3 years in the U.S. military in the Army, spent 18 months in Korea, during which time I drank, and then, of course, came home, went to college, graduated, and I started teaching school. Still drinking. And, of course, like alcoholism does, or any other addiction does, the more you face life and are unable or unwilling or incapable of facing it to the degree to which you think you can and should, your drinking continues. And it came to a conclusion on April the 25th, 1986. I had been confronted by my wife many, many times, and confront's maybe not a good word because she had a level of love and understanding and compassion, but yet was concerned that I was not responding properly. And the statement she made to me that night was that if I didn't love you as much as I do, I'd let you drink yourself to death. And That had a tremendous impact on me. And from that day forth, I have not had a drop of alcohol. I look back on my life, and there was always a part of my mind that as my drinking increased, which it did to quantities that we never told, it's not that important, but I functioned very well. I taught school, and I was a union rep for 35 years. I taught school for 10 years, and I was a union rep for 35 and a half after that.
Very successful.
Very successful. Belonged to the Chamber of Commerce for 38 years. Very active in the community. And I was the quintessential functional alcoholic, because always in the back of my mind there was that lurking fear that I would be found out. And I was an alcoholic long before I finally admitted it and went into treatment. Now, I never went to rehab because being an old German bullhead, I figured and when I went into recovery, I didn't go through the rehab or anything. I duked it out, and I'll tell you, those are some pretty tough months when I first quit drinking. But then I obviously went to AA, and I still do to this day, with some regularity. I sponsor young, old, it doesn't matter, but I sponsor people in the program. But it was difficult for me to really, truly get into the program, because coming from a position of some responsibility and experience and success, I was a little hesitant to be told, here's what you got to do. And I used to say, what do you mean? Who don't you know who I am? And these old timers said, we sure do, and we don't give a hoot. You know, if you want us, if you want to get your life together, you listen to us. And that's what it was about. I mean, it was a long, hard road for a while, because I've said many times, and people laugh all the time, but I say I'm a reluctant learner and I'm a belligerent learner. But thank goodness there was something about my need to recover. And you know, like I say, I was never arrested, never lost a single thing. You'll hear all kind of horror stories in this business. People losing families, losing homes, losing jobs. I was very fortunate. But I lost me. I lost me. I lost my sense of dignity, my self-respect, my degree of, I was a nothing inside.
They were personal feelings,
They
right?
were.
I will tell you, I knew you from the professional world, and I was shocked to see that you were going to be on our program, because until 15 minutes ago, I never knew you had a problem, but it affected you personally.
Oh yeah, I mean, because I was the quintessential Dr. Hyde and Mr. Jekyll, or whatever the case, I forget that. But I tried to put on a good face. And like I say, they never have. And I didn't do early in my drinking career. I didn't drink a lot during the day, but eventually, and I was always a runner. And now, of course, with a lot of reasons, I can't. But I used to get up in the morning, and I'd have a little 8-ounce glass of vodka before I'd run.
Wow. Did you have children, Frank?
Oh yeah, 2 lovely young daughters. And
did they realize
no,
that you had a
they
problem?
never did, because, as I say, I was never abusive. I mean, I was guilty more of sins of omission than commission. I mean, I wasn't, I didn't get to some of their functions and all that, but I was never around the house. I never was goofy to the point, I'm goofy anyway, but I mean, it wasn't to the point I was unable to communicate and so on. I mean, the kids, after I'd been in the program 6 months, I confronted them. They were 12 and 16 at the time, and they said, well, we didn't know, we knew you drank, but so, I mean, it didn't affect the family. Now, my wife, God love her, she stuck with me, and it was because of her influence, of course, that I finally made the decision. But I want to make a statement about this, too. Recovery is for people who want it, not people who need it. You can need something in life. You can need a lot of things. You can need a good job, a good salary, a good this. But until you want it bad enough, you're never going to survive. And recovery is a program that is so important, because you're going to change everything about you. Your ideas, your feelings, how you act and react. And I wanted it. When I lost myself, it's hard to explain to people the desolation and the depth of being a nobody. But yet, outwardly, they think, "Oh my God, I'm like I said, I used to moderate Chamber of Commerce, legislative breakfast TV show. I mean, I was National Diabetes Association. I was the parliamentarian of that group in Washington. I mean, I never.
The world thought more of you than you thought of you.
Absolutely, and that's the key. That's a good point, because, and I used to tell my kids when I taught school, you can't expect others to think highly of you unless you first of all think highly of yourself. And I lost that. And that's a horrible, horrible thing. But I had people around me who loved me and helped me, and unfortunately they enabled me. That's one of the businesses you'll hear about as the others talk. Enabling society, families, employers have a horrible problem with enabling people instead of, and confronting is a bad word. Maybe addressing the issue is a better thing, because too many times people look at confrontation as a battle. and it's not. We just, people get away with a lot of things in life.
Your wife loved you an awful lot.
Oh,
and she
no question.
tolerated what was going on.
Absolutely.
But did anybody else on the outside? I mean, are you what they would consider a closet drinker?
Well,
I mean, you didn't do it in the school.
Oh, no.
So,
no. But you see, once I left teaching, then I got into the union work, and I worked out of my home for the first couple of years. Well, there's nothing better for a drinker than to have easy access to the booze. And then, of course, when I had an office here in town for 34 years, and I used to stash a few things here and there. And
did you think that you had an addictive personality when you were young? Did you have other addictions that
no,
you can think of?
I don't think that. I don't think so. We like I say, we were very poor people. We didn't have anything, and as a result, we went to school, and there were 8 kids in my family. And my dad died at age 40, and my brother was 14, I was 13, and my youngest sister was 4. So, we had a heck of a row to hoe. And as a result, we were not the most wealthy family in town. In fact, we were the poorest. We were poor in church mice, and people used to ridicule us. We didn't have clothes to wear like other kids. I never owned a bicycle, a tricycle, anything like that. It was just something that so I grew up as the victim.
But you were smart enough to go to college.
Absolutely. I left Johnsonburg at age 17, joined the Army, went to college, and came back to Altoona. And best decision I ever made, because I met my wife, and she was a student teacher when I started teaching here. And
we only think about drugs when we think about addictiveness, but alcohol is a terrific problem. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to tell you that I have considered Frank a friend of mine for more years than maybe either of us should remember. But I never knew that you had a problem. I was shocked when I saw your name on this sheet, but I've never been more proud of you than I am right now, that you would reach out and share your story with other people so they can get help. You're a good man, Frank.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
We'll be right back with some other guests, and they're going to be just as exciting. Thank you. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. We're joined now by a gentleman by the name of Corky Gutshall. Corky, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Tell us a little bit about yourself, Corky.
I'm originally from Altoona. I've lived here all my life, with a few brief exceptions. Went to Altoona High. I'm currently a construction manager with J.C. Orr in Altoona, and that's about it. Been a carpenter for the last 25 or so years.
That's nothing to sneeze at. Last time I had a carpenter come in, he made more than my doctor. Tell me, Corky, we just finished talking to Frank Rosenhoover, who confessed to having suffered from addiction and was able to defeat it with love and help from his family. You're going to tell us about what happens when one of your family members has a problem.
Well, I'll try to a little bit. I have a daughter who has a problem, and growing up, we couldn't have had a better relationship. She did fine through all her school years. When she graduated, my wife and I looked at each other and couldn't believe that it had been that easy. And we said that to each other. She went from high school to college and did well through 2 years of college, and then left to go to the main campus at Penn State. And apparently she had had some problems and kept them fairly well hidden. Nothing out of the ordinary, because she continued to do well and prosper in school. But as she got to Penn State, things just fell apart once she got there. No supervision, just freedom for the first time, and apparently a problem that had been growing unbeknownst to us up to that point. The wheels just came off the wagon once she got there. She had some illnesses that most likely were caused by some of the drug use, and withdrew from school and went back and withdrew again, and then came back to the area and lived with us for a while, and then moved in with a boyfriend. And I tell a lot of people that I don't know anybody who had a closer relationship with their daughter than I had. There's only one guy I can think of who even had as close or anywhere near the relationship that we had. And once she got back to town and moved out, we ran into some things, and there became extended periods where I didn't know where she was or what was going on. Oh, wow. And that was probably the biggest sign that something was going on. And you don't see all these things as they're happening. It's a gradual progression. Friends changed slowly. We didn't know where she was going. And for the first time in her life, as I said, for an extended period, I didn't have very, very little contact at all for 6 months, and that was just devastating. But I knew I had to let her find her own life, and because she wasn't at home, there was really nothing I could do. I managed to find out where she was living and keep as good a tabs on her as I could.
It had to tear your heart out.
Oh, it did. It still does. It still does to talk about it. Eventually, I saw her car broken down along the side of the road. And the next day, I got a call from her. Pardon me?
No, Corky, please. I'm sure this is very difficult for you. And that's why we appreciate it so much. You have no idea the parents out there watching this show right now that are saying, I wonder if, and they don't know. And you didn't know. Am I correct?
Right, that's right. At that point, she asked if she was allowed to come back home. And I, of course, said yes. I mean, you do anything you can to help your children. Within a few days, she told us that she was addicted to heroin.
Wow.
And that was the first time we really knew. At that point, the first thing you do is start calling rehabs because you want to get your child treated. And not knowing any better at that point, because it was my first experience with having to try to deal with addiction in this fashion. Sure. That you think if you can get somebody off to rehab and in an environment that Well, that's your first inkling. You think that you can send them off to rehab and they'll do the program and come back cured. Unfortunately, it doesn't work that way, and Frank alluded to that a little bit. We did eventually get her into a detox and a rehab, and as I said, they go through that and you think that's the cure, and that's just the start of a long process, because she was not ready to be rehabilitated at that time. She wasn't ready. She wanted to do what it took to get off drugs, but it's just a long, extensive process till somebody, from the time they realize they have a problem till being ready to actually do the work that it takes to deal with changing their lives. So
it must have, and the impact was on your wife also, am I correct?
Oh yes, she immediately started searching for the reasons, what we had done wrong, and trying to figure out.
It was your fault.
Yeah, how what we could have done or how we could have changed things. My mindset was a little different. I didn't think we had done anything wrong, because she had a great life growing up. We didn't really want for anything. My wife and I both work full time. We have a nice house. We had lots of nice things, lots of nice toys, and there was no reason for this. It's just one of those things. You get in with the wrong crowd and you make some bad choices, and all of a sudden you're in a place that you never dreamed you would be.
It had to be very difficult for you and your wife to, as you said, to analyze this and say, what's our next step?
That's exactly right. Through getting my daughter into several different programs and through the changes in her life, we managed to live through this to a point where at the moment she's clean and doing fairly well. But our struggle was with making the right decisions for my wife and I to be able to continue our lives without being completely bowled over by everything that is going on in hers.
I'm sure.
And to that point, we found a support group. It's Hope Group of Blair County, which is for parents and loved ones of addicts. And how
did you get in contact with Hope Group?
My wife was looking for help, and she called a counselor and went to see the counselor because she was blaming herself for everything.
Okay.
And saw the counselor a couple times, and this counselor was affiliated with Blair County Drug and Alcohol and recommended Hope Group to us. So my wife started going there, and after a few times, to support her, I started going as well. And we just found that it's an anonymous group. The people there were helpful and supportive, and they really helped us to see that this was not something we had done, but having started to deal with it, we now had to deal with helping heal ourselves, because we fall under the heading of codependent.
Like the caregiver. Take care of the caregiver.
Yes. And you do everything you can to help your child or your loved one, but a lot of what you do, you end up helping them to continue what they're doing. So Hope Group helps you realize what you need to do to take care of yourself and how to begin the process of not enabling your loved one to continue with their problem.
Corky, thank you for your story. That's got to be an emotional one. And again, we look at the community. This is what Operation Our Town is all about. We're all ignorant about something, and if you're a parent out there and you don't know, that's what Operation Our Town does. It educates, it facilitates, it makes information available to people that want to use it and is helpful to them. So we need your help. I don't want to sound like but I am. I'm pleading for your donations of money, your donations of time. Parents can only do so much. We've got to work together to clean up our communities and make it a safer place for our children. And I hope that if you have a situation and you listen to Corkys Story and realize the tunnel has an end, and you can see some light out there if you're willing to take advantage of the opportunities. Corky, thank you. You're a good man, and
thank you.
God bless
Thanks
you.
for
I hope
having
your
me.
family's well, and I hope everything works out great for you.
Thank you.
Come back in a couple minutes, and we're going to talk to two exciting guests. Thank you.
Operation Our Town is reaching out into our community every day, helping groups like the Gloria Gates Foundation. They received a grant in 2009 from Operation Our Town to help fund their program, which was established more than 10 years ago.
We now have children who've gone through our program and are out of high school, and they're young adults, and they're coming back and they're telling us the impact our after-school program had on them. So we know that we are reaching the kids.
The Gloria Gates Foundation prides itself on teaching the children lessons that will stay with them throughout their life.
When things get better in their life and they look back, then sometimes we get a note and say, I remember what you tried to teach me, thank you.
Operation Our Town, creating community-minded citizens for a better tomorrow.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. We're joined now by two more very special guests. On my right, Ms. Judy Rosser, who is Executive Director of the Blair County Drug and Alcohol Program. And on my left, Mr. Michael Campbell, who is President of the St. Joseph Institute. First of all, Michael, tell us about the St. Joseph Institute and what it does.
Well, our focus is on rehabilitation. So we're the first step in the process of recovery. People come to us for detox and then learning how to live their lives differently so they can then move into recovery and hopefully stay there.
And this, tell me where this is located at.
We're located about halfway between Altoona and State College. Our campus is up in the mountains, very private, good place for healing and getting well.
It sounds like a good place. And I've just met you for a couple minutes, but you look like you're a pretty good president. A lot of empathy, a lot of empathy.
There's a lot of work to be done.
I'm sure in your position you must have heard stories like our first two guests have told many times.
Heard the stories many times. You know, there's so many things that are unique to each person's story, but also things that are in common. Addiction is a disease, and it's a peculiar disease because it has strange symptoms. You know, the symptoms that are there most often are denial, rationalization, minimization, people trying to protect their behaviors until they finally come to the realization that it's not working. What you also find is that addiction, some people describe it as the symptom, not the problem, because so often people drink or use to self-medicate, to deal with issues, and it's so important that they deal with those.
Michael, is there such a thing as an addictive personality? The reason why I asked that question is because I come from an Irish family. And quite frankly, excessive drinking, as Frank Rosenhoover said, it's part of the family tradition. And I always worried that I know I have some other addictions like overeating. and is it possible that there's such a thing as an addictive personality? You just need to be careful because you're going to get addicted to something.
Well, there's a lot of ways of looking at that, but yes, we do have perhaps tendencies to get involved in things in excess. But the other part of your question is, are we genetically going to become addicted?
Right.
And there, science tells us yes, but. And the yes but means we may have some genes that make us vulnerable to addiction, but it doesn't mean you're necessarily going to become addicted. There are lots of other factors that contribute to an addiction.
It would help if you recognized that in advance, wouldn't it? If you knew you had that potential problem.
And in the future that may happen. It's just a year ago that they found the DNA pattern that they think is linked to alcoholism. So I imagine in the next few years, science will move us forward in that regard.
Corky told us about his daughter's struggles after going into rehab. Does everybody that goes into rehab recover?
There was an issue that's very important, and that is you have to want to. Recovery is a process. It's a lifelong process. The first mistake that people often make is the assumption that rehab gets you cured. All it does is begin a journey. And then there's the process of living your recovery day to day, and that is what's so important. And the other thing is that it's really hard to do it on your own. You need the support and help of others. That's why it's great to have groups out there like AA and others that are going to help you through that journey.
Tell me, if I were the parents of a child and I recognized it, do I immediately go for help? How do I recognize that my child needs help?
Well, there's lots of different signs and symptoms, and education is probably a starting place to learn about addiction. But then you also have to look at your behavior and whether you're enabling the individual, because they have to come to the realization that they need help. And so it's so easy to get into the pattern of continuing to make it possible for someone to live with their addiction.
We hear that phrase tossed around a lot, enablers. What does it really mean? Does it mean you take your child to buy drugs? Does it mean you just give them the run of the purse strings? What is an enabler?
Well, I think we all have to put up boundaries of what is right and what is not right. Mm-hmm. And what you'll find is that people who are in addiction, they are masters at manipulation. So you have to stop giving in to that manipulation. Just recently I was talking to a mother, and she said, well, every time I tell my son that I'm not going to help him anymore or give him any more money, he says, well, if you do that, I'll just give up and probably kill myself. And so she reaches into her wallet and she gives him money because she doesn't want that to happen. So he's great at manipulating, and she's just enabling, and until they both stop, he's never going to start getting well.
Wow. But you do see some successes, right?
Absolutely.
That's got to be so gratifying.
There's nothing better than seeing someone get their life back on track again.
I mean, I always envied a physician who can say to a patient, "You're healed." You have that ability too. Basically.
Well, you don't heal them, but when you see them get their lives back in a good direction, you see families coming together again, you see marriages healed, you see a mother who says, I have my daughter back. That's pretty powerful stuff.
That's wonderful. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Great job. Judy, tell us about how Blair County Drug and Alcohol fits into this whole picture.
The Blair County Drug and Alcohol Corporation actually manages a lot of the state and federal dollars that come into our community to help support prevention of substance abuse, intervening on substance abuse, and then treating substance abuse. So we actually manage for the uninsured individual the treatment monies that are out there. We work with the system. We make sure that there's access to services when somebody wants help, and provide assessments for that, for an initial level of care for them, and to see where they're going to end up in their treatment services and help manage and get them there. We also provide other services that help support them, because a lot of times individuals coming into our office or into our system have a lot of needs along with that need to be looked at also as they start recovering. As Mr. Campbell had indicated, the treatment part of this, when we look at a recovery process, the pre-engagement is everything we're doing out there to get the word out there that there's help out there, you don't have to live this way, that families don't have to live this way, that we can help you out. That's that pre-engagement part, and trying to get them in, working with the courts so that if there is a drug-related arrest, that they're placed over and sent into our system so that we can start assessing them, engaging them in treatment, because as was said here, individuals need to want it to recover, But to get them to treatment and start looking at that, that's that early change in them. Sometimes they're coming in with a lot of outside stressors causing them to come through our doors. But once they get there and we can keep them engaged, keep working with them, help them connect with the community through resources that are out there in the mutual aid groups such as AA and NA or Hope Group, and also recovery groups that are happening at our churches now, that's where recovery starts happening. That's that early recovery, rebuilding their lives, making choices for education pieces that they may have let go of, looking at the groups, the people, places, and things in that early recovery, because that's the most isolating part for somebody. When they walk away from their lifestyle of addiction and the things that they did, they've got to find another something for that void, or they'll start to return to those behaviors. And they've got to change those behaviors through engaging with new people, people that understand where they're coming from, that can help and support them in that early period of recovery. And our community can be a really big support to that too. And the things that we're looking at in our community, the Blair County Drug and Alcohol Program is planning for, is looking how do we support recovery in the community? Because it's not only individually, them rebuilding their behaviors, but what are those things that they can do that have no alcohol and no, the substance use isn't there, that they can enjoy life fully in recovery.
That's what a challenge.
It is.
I hope you were listening, folks. What Judy said was, there are no barriers. They can come to your office. It's
Absolutely.
not financial. You
Absolutely.
go
Free
and
assessments.
get help.
Our office provides free assessments to anyone. Doesn't matter their economic status, whether you have income or don't have income. What we want is you to at least make that first step, come in
Now,
our door, and
if I
start
were a
seeking
parent
help.
and I needed direction, would I call your office also?
You could also call our office, yes. And we've
So
had parents do that.
You're
come in.
kind of like the umbrella.
Right. We provide like the early intervention and then the actual, getting people into services and working with the systems that are touching these people.
Is there an age when you see, like, how young do you see people getting involved in these drug activities?
We've had kids in elementary school that we've served.
Oh my!
Yeah, I mean, it just depends on the family systems. There's a lot of issues and risks, that go along, and Mr. Campbell alluded to some of those. It's not just, the earlier you use, you're higher risk for developing addiction. Okay, because of how the brain is growing in a young individual. As they're growing, the brain's changing, and you had talked about genetics may play a role in that, but those early choices, a young child their frontal lobe of the brain is really not developed enough where it connects to make those decisions that, if I do this, this is going to happen to me. And we see that in a lot of things, that they'll do riskier behavior, get hurt, and they may learn from that, or they may repeat that risky behavior again. But the earlier somebody uses, the risk of progressing into the disease can happen. So that's one of the things that we try to work on, and through prevention is trying to really impact on that first use and what they're using. And it can, when you're talking about use too, you're not just talking about hard drugs, you're talking about tobacco, alcohol, because those are usually the first two drugs that will be used by young people, and that can already start the brain to start to change, where the memory system of pleasure to that, and that's where addiction really is happening within the brain.
You've used the term disease several times. I guess that's a step forward, is that our society has recognized that these problems with addiction are a disease.
Right, and Mr. Campbell indicated too, the science has come so far on that in the last probably 15 years, where they really are seeing where the actual change in the brain is happening, that they can actually tell you the different areas of the brain, the pleasure-seeking areas of the brain, how memories built there, and that is why someone will go back to that substance of use that really has given them pleasure. Or in your case, it could be food. I mean, it's a chemical response in the brain that you may start thinking of a chocolate cake. Well, before the end of the day, you may eat that chocolate cake because you have already triggered that chemical response in your brain. I mean, simply, I mean, that's what we're talking about here, is how that happens. And it's so hard for parents because we've come from a society where a lot of people look at it as willpower, weakness, when we're really finding out this is really a progressive disease, a disease that people can die from, and it's a real life and death situation for some family members. You know, that they're really afraid that their child is going to die. In our Hope Support Group, when we first started it, we actually started it because of individuals from the law enforcement came to us who were arresting these young kids, you know, 18 to 21, heroin, and the parents were devastated. They were just broken up as they were, you know, handcuffing their child and leaving the home. They said, we need something for families out there. So we, at the urgence of Randy Feathers, actually asked us, can we put something together? And we did. It's been going strong for over 12, 13 years now. But what we saw with one of the facilitators of that, she said, with family members, it's really hard because you've got to make a decision. You know, whether you do something or you don't do something doesn't mean that person's going to get help. But what you've got to choose is what those boundaries are. And you've got to live with the consequences, because this is a disease that your family member may not recover or may die from. But you need to start making those boundaries and know what you can accept and what you can't accept in your life and hold to them.
Judy, I've got to ask you both a question. More and more I hear in the news, and I see in, you know, people bragging about the fact that, well, I just smoke marijuana and it doesn't mean anything. Oh yeah, well, I smoke marijuana and like it's a joke. And they want to legalize it, but I must tell you, I'm very confused. You know, if you saw your child coming home with marijuana, would you be concerned?
I would be concerned. First of all, marijuana, we've known for a long time, is often a gateway drug. It's the first drug people often use. We also know from the science and the research that a lot of people do get addicted to marijuana in the same way they get addicted to alcohol. Not everyone, but a very large percentage.
You don't hear those arguments when they're addressing that everybody should have the right to buy marijuana.
We don't hear that. And also, there are more people getting addicted than ever before, because the marijuana back in the days of Woodstock was not nearly as potent as it is today. And today it seems to get people addicted much more quickly and much more solidly into an addictive pattern.
Do you agree with that?
Oh, absolutely. That is probably one of the biggest challenges we have currently nationally with the legalization of marijuana. Number one, it is a hallucinogenic. It attacks the brain no different than tobacco, alcohol, heroin, any other drug. It causes a chemical response in the brain that can increase addictive behavior and use onto other substances. I'm recovering of 25 years. My drug of choice was marijuana. Okay, I started with tobacco and alcohol, but the first illegal drug I went to was marijuana. And it wasn't a big step to go to other drugs from there.
So you actually have experience.
Yes, and I can tell you, there may not be a physical, like alcohol and heroin has a physical change to the body where you actually have to use that substance or you start to get sick once you get that physical dependency. Marijuana is a whole different animal with the way it attacks the brain and the psychological impact on your life. You still have some of the things that Frank had talked about, that shame, that emptiness. That drug still fills that spot. So you really need to understand, as family members, this is not something we want to happen in our community. A lot of people go back to, yeah, but we're locking all these people up that are using marijuana and we're wasting all our tax dollars on jail. No, I mean, we've already decriminalized a lot of what happens with marijuana. You're not seeing that. What we see that are heading into prison are usually our drug dealers. The ones that are dealing volumes of marijuana end up behind bars where they should be, because they're dealing in our communities, bringing poison into our youth, and we need to address that. The other people are really being shot into treatment. The individuals that are coming in with low levels of possession or having small amounts on them usually are ending up in the treatment facilities where we want them, because
Judy,
we
thank
need
you.
to address that.
Judy, thank you. I hope you were listening, and I hope this clears up, as it has for me, whether or not we should be thinking about legalizing anything that will be a threat to our children. And that's important. We're going to be right back with all of our guests and kind of sum up what we've learned here today. We'll be right back. We've been talking about addiction and treatment and what it really means to the families and what's out there for you and what help's available to you. We've learned an awful lot. I'd like to thank each of you for that and for sharing with us. Corky, emotional and touching. And Frank, like I said, I've never been more proud of you, except when you made a 40-foot jump shot. Well, welcome back. Let me ask the question. Do you see us getting better or worse in our fight? Frank, you were in the educational system.
Well,
what do you see out there?
Unfortunately, changing the perceptions that people have is very difficult. And the issue of addiction for so many years was looked upon as a class of people who were, a little substandard. You weren't capable of, and therefore you drank or you drugged and all. And if I had more resources, I would just like to explain and ask people to be more considerate, because in my travels in AA in the last 26 and a half years, I have seen brain surgeons, I have seen lawyers, I've seen people from all walks of life, the clergy and who come to meetings and they express the frustrations of living with an addiction. And yet recovery is perhaps the best kept secret in town, because I know I violate the principles of AA, which they say anonymity is the spiritual foundation of our program. Well, how can you be successful how can you sell a product if you don't market it? And unfortunately, we don't have enough responsible people who are willing and have the courage, perhaps, to say publicly, I am an alcoholic. And the last time I spoke to leadership Blair County was about 8 months ago, and I introduced myself like I do at every AA meeting. I say, I'm an alcoholic, I'm Frank Rosenhoover. And they look at you, but unfortunately, that's the perception the public has sometimes, that we are not whole people. And we've got to get more programs like this to make people understand. And I know Mike and Judy and Corky, even in the group he's in, we've just got to keep saying the same thing over and over again. It affects everybody.
It sure does. Corky, tell me about this group. Is it just called Hope?
It's Hope Group, Hope for Blair County. And kind of goes back and forth, but
what do we want to tell the parents out there? How do they get involved in this? How was it an easy transition to call them up and say, "Hey, when's a meeting"?
You don't even have to call. You just need to show up. We meet Wednesdays at 7 o'clock at the Blair County Drug and Alcohol Center in 764 Plaza, which is right near the UPS in Altoona, and It's an anonymous group, just like AA and NA, but we too need people, which is why I'm here, who aren't afraid to say they're part of it, to let people know that it's there. And I can't tell you how many times I've heard other people tell my story there, because there's just so many similarities that we as parents or with a significant other that is dealing with addiction go through. It's it's just nice to know that there are other people there who know exactly where you are and can help you with your struggle, and it's a real blessing to have this group.
Corky, for the people that didn't have a pen in their hand when you were giving the address and the time, repeat that very slowly for people out there that need to know where and what time.
It's at the offices of Blair County Drug and Alcohol Prevention in the 764 Plaza on Route 764, just outside of Altoona, across from UPS.
Okay, thank you. Judy, tell us, do you feel good about what's happening with our prevention programs and treatment programs?
Oh, absolutely. I think Blair County is probably ahead of most of the state of Pennsylvania in what we're doing. And that's really, I have to give credit to Donna Gordy, the commissioner who retired here recently of 25 years. She, about 15 years ago, really grabbed on to communities that care philosophy, her and President Judge Capriva, and brought that into our community. And part of that is bringing in what they call blueprint products. And again, prevention is probably the most researched of the addiction processes, even more so than the treatment side. But prevention for the last 25 years has done a lot of research about what works, what doesn't work, how do we address the risk factors that are associated with addiction. And through that process, they have blueprint programs. And in our community, we have almost probably 10 or 11 of the 13, 14 blueprint programs right now in our community that are used to help intervene on substance use and prevent. We work with many agencies in our communities that are doing good prevention work. And again, prevention, it's just not something just like what Mike was saying, when you go into treatment. Treatment's not the cure. Treatment's the beginning. It's the beginning steps of your recovery process, and that initial stage of when you start really taking a look at yourself and what you're going to do when you leave and get back into and develop and grow in your life. Well, with prevention, it's the same way. We look at the different communities, whether it's our community, what's it doing, what are our schools doing, what are families, what's available for the family, and then that peer, because the peer group is the highest risk factor. If you have peers that are using, the risk of your child using will go up. The other thing is accessibility. Operation Our Town, Coalition, Blair Counties for Drug-Free Communities. We have these coalitions in our community that are looking at this. So when you're looking at what are we doing in our community, Blair County is doing so much with the programs we've brought in, with the community support that's starting to come forward in the last 10 years, and then also in our schools, what the schools are trying to do in relationship to address truancy, dropout rates. And then what we offer with the families, the Blueprints programs, most of those programs are helping parents parent and set boundaries and taking a look at what's going on in their family, especially when the child's already been identified as at risk, maybe through the schools.
Michael, tell me about St. Joseph Institute. If Corky would have recognized, when he recognized the problem, could he have called you directly, or do you need like a doctor's prescription to go there? Tell me about what's the entrance program?
For substance abuse treatment, you don't need a doctor's referral. You can go directly, so people just call us directly, and then they come into treatment if we're the appropriate place for them. And you know, there's a number of things you're doing in treatment. One is you're really trying to help people learn how to change their life and live it differently. You've got to manage stress differently. You've got to manage conflict differently. You've got to learn to avoid, as Judy was saying, the people, places, and things that have become problems for you. So there's a lot of learning that has to happen. And also there's some work of personal change that probably has to happen, because so many people are involved in their drinking or using because of depression, anxiety, traumas. So treating that also becomes part of the whole process to get them starting on a road to recovery, and then it's back into the community, and that's where the community support leads people forward and helps and supports them as they go on.
Judy talked about peer group, and we had a young man on here several programs ago. Is it Crossroads?
Yes, Crossroads.
Is that one of the options that they have?
Well, yeah, it's a clubhouse. It's a recovery clubhouse, and I happen to be very involved in that one too. But it's a clubhouse where people who have any kind of an addiction, primarily the alcoholic community handles it more than most other people do, but it's open 12 hours a day, and people who need the support, the encouragement, because like it was Mike and Judy were both talking, once you get into treatment, that's the beginning, because then you got to go back into society, and you're facing the same family, the same job, the same peer groups and everything, and you've got to really want to recover, and sometimes you need the encouragement. So Crossroads is open, and they have meetings in there of various groups, NA and Overeaters Anonymous and so on. But when the meetings aren't on, there's coffee available, and there's always someone in there who is a recovering person, and you get there and you can talk about things, because as I said before, sometimes it's the stigma. You can't find that kind of camaraderie, that kind of understanding. You walk into any kind of a recovery group, and you are immediately one of the family. You don't have to explain who you are. That's one thing about recovery. You don't have to sell yourself. You're a recovering person, and everybody knows you, and they love you. And that's the thing that we need more of, see, and that's what Crossroads does. And it's something that we're having some trouble trying to keep afloat too, and so we need help there too, because rent and utilities and all that stuff, coffee, for God's sake, it's an expensive proposition.
Frank, thank you. Yes, Judy.
And I wanted to add, there's two things when you said, is our community doing well here? And those are two groups that there's two groups that I really want to make sure that we do embrace, and that is our recovering community. Without them, we would be really in trouble, because people need some place to go. They need some place where they can identify with other people, and that people will accept them and know where they're at and support them and not enable them. Because people in recovery will really usually say, they know the walk you're going, and they'll stop you in your tracks when you're going down the wrong path. And the other one is our law enforcement, because our law enforcement has really done, and support through Operation Our Town, has done some things that really have ebbed the tide of drugs coming into our community. And that's important when you look at the availability of substance in a community. Our recovering community embraces that too, because they know the less substances available, it keeps them out of risk too.
Judy, thank you.
So that's important.
This has been an interesting program. I hope, and I'll tell you what, I feel good about what's happening, but Frank, more respect than ever. Thank you. You're a good man and a contributor to the community, and I'm proud to call you my friend.
Well, thank you. I'm proud to be
here.
Judy,
the work you do, I'm sure sometimes thankless, terrific, needed, and I hope appreciated. Corky, families are a very special part of life, and you've been willing to share. Thank you for that. It takes a special person to share their pain to help somebody else avoid theirs. And Michael, good luck on your endeavors.
Thank you.
Let's get them all home safe and drug-free and addiction-free. And until next time, I'm Dean McKnight, and this is Operation Our Town. Thank you.